Hello, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is for you. Welcome back to another episode of the Angular Plus Show. My name is Brian Love. I'm going to be your host today, and I am joined by two good friends. Jan, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, and I every time we're on the podcast together, I'm just always so jealous of your perfect radio voice. It's just like this perfect calmness,
Yeah, it's
soothness.
funny.
It's just
Yes, it's nice, isn't it?
if you ever
Uh,
happen to record an audiobook, just let me know, and I will just play that and repeat to put me to sleep, and in a very positive way, in the nicest way. I mean this.
that's that's wonderful to hear, Jan. I'm so glad that you're here with us. It's funny. I'll tell a quick story. I didn't realize that the first time somebody had told me that I was doing some courses for Thinkster with my friend Joe, and he said the same thing. He's like, Brian, sometimes I just want to listen to your videos just on background because I like you go into this kind of smooth, very
Yeah.
comfortable voice, and he's like, I really enjoy it. He's like, so good job, keep it coming. Um, Anyways, we're also joined by Chow. Hopefully, Chow is kind of dialing in here remotely. That's kind of the world we live in 2025. Chow, are you with us?
I am with you, and I share the same sentiment with Jan Nicholas here. I love your voice, man. So, I mean this in the nicest way possible. But yeah, I love it when you lead the podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. I also love that, like, I introed you. I felt like I was dialing up to like the International Space Station. It's like,
Right?
Chow,
It
do
had
we
like
have
this.
you with us? Are you on the line? It's like the 80s, when like the broadcaster would like reach out and just hope that like somebody's gonna pick up the other line. And then the way it sounded over your phone was perfect. It sounded like you're literally in outer space talking to us. But I know that you're helping out on some family stuff, and we just want to honor that and thank you. Thank you for being here with us. All right, let's get right to it. So our guest today is Jeff Welpley. Jeff Welpley is a Google developer expert in Angular, longtime contributor to the Angular community, speaker, author. Like, I know you've just done a million things, Jeff. Personally, for me, I remember when I got started in the Angular community around, I think Angular JS, like 2014, 2015. I remember when 2016, I went to ng-conf. You might have spoken to the conference. I don't remember, but I think so.
Yeah, yeah, I
And I
spoke at
just
that one.
remember like getting a chance to say hi to you and just to learn from you. So first of all, just thank you for all that you've done for the Angular community over the years. Yeah, you're a legend, man, and we're just proud to have you like on the podcast. Today we're going to
That's
be
too
talking
much.
about,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
of course, man. Today we're going to be talking about Angular and SEO, search engine optimization. So go ahead and introduce yourself. I think we've had you on the podcast. I hope so. But
Yeah,
for the
definitely.
listener, go ahead and yeah, introduce yourself to us, and then why don't you kick us off right into the topic? Let's start talking about Angular and SEO in 2025.
Yeah, so Jeff Whelpley, the co-founder and CTO of GetHuman, also, like you mentioned, Google developer expert, long time in the community, doing a lot of different things some of which I'll talk about today, doing a lot of SEO stuff for over a decade. And it's kind of funny to talk about Angular and SEO, especially, well, less so now, but for sure in the past, because they were like oil and water at many times in the
Didn't
past.
mix. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Or
It was
you
definitely,
try
in
to
fact,
use Universal. Yeah, but go ahead.
well, even going back before that, funny story. My first ng-conf, actually, it was the first ng-conf, the very first ng-conf I was at. I went to talk to Misco, and even at that time, I was running a company that was heavily dependent on SEO, knew a lot about it back then, even. And I asked him because I loved Angular, but it was not SEO friendly at all. It was just a single page. It was all client side, just single page app, everything. And so I asked him, like, well, is there some way we can modify it? React was starting to work on their server side rendered part. And his response at that time was along the lines, I don't remember exactly, but it was something along the lines of like, oh, you don't need that. Like that's just like a short-term thing that is sort of still needed, but already the search engines are starting to crawl client-side
I
JavaScript.
remember that. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody's. Don't worry about it. Like
Uh-huh.
in another couple of years, it's just going to be all web
Won't be a problem.
components and everything. Yeah, it won't be a problem.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I continue to joke with Misco about that when I see him now, because as you know, he left after all the stuff with Angular and whatever else, he joined a company building a server-side rendered framework.
Quick. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Quick, which is a great framework or whatever, but it's just so funny that it went to complete 180. But yeah, for a long time, Angular and SEO just not built, not two things that worked well together.
Let's start there, I think. So like you mentioned that, and I agree with you. I remember when I first got started with Angular, and I was like, okay, well, like, what does this mean for SEO? What does my DOM look like, right? And yeah, once it bootstraps and the everything's hydrated, like you have this nice, beautiful, you have DOM with all these elements, and you've got interactivity and bindings and closures, and everything's happening, and it's like, oh, this is great. But when you just like view source, you're just like, oh, like div app root. Oh, interesting. Like, where's all my content? So tell me a little bit about, like, you mentioned that, Angular and SEO have often not worked well together. Tell me a little bit more about why that is. And for the listener, maybe that is not familiar with that story. And then let's bridge that into kind of where are we today and where are things moving?
Yeah, so I guess there's two main core parts to that. One is that with ways that search engines have worked for a long time, up until we'll get to how they've changed drastically in the past year because of AI related stuff. But since Google first came out in the early 2000s or late 1990s or whatever, until a couple of years ago, the main focus was on trying to gather signals that the search engine could determine the user had a good experience, that basically your website answered whatever question that they had. And there's a number of ways that they were able to signals that they used to determine that. A big one was your performance related stuff. So it was, how quickly content was rendered, how quickly the user saw the page and was able to interact with it. A bunch of things related around that was a good indication to search engines that the user probably at least for the initial load, like had a good experience. And then there's a whole bunch of other signals like later on after that one. But just even on that very first set of signals, Angular like failed completely, right? Because like you were saying, there was nothing. There's usually a delay the very first time, and then a lot of jank that would go on. Even if you tried to, for a while, if you remember, there was like a thought with web components to just put like a skeleton page and then have it like fill in. But that was sort of a bad experience too, because it's like the user thought that they could maybe interact with it, and then they just got frustrated, like trying to click around and whatever. So it wasn't until we got to the point that truly Angular was able to server render that those, at least those set of things improved. And the other part of it, just to talk about the second part of it, is that the search engines in general, like a lot of people don't think about this as much, but the crawler for Google and for every other search engine, and now for every other AI company, it crawls the web, but it takes time. It takes time and resources and ultimately money for them to crawl the web. And it's cheaper and easier and faster for them if your site renders faster. So like they wouldn't explicitly tell you this all the time, but a lot of the people who are SEO professionals and like really deep into it would know that your site would benefit because if you made it easier for the crawler to crawl your website. And so one of those things is performance, but there's a whole bunch of other things to do. It's just like you remove those various impediments, because like Misko was trying to say way back then, like, oh, they could just client render your app or whatever. It's like, okay, sure, they do have that, but exactly, it like takes forever. And so if you're relying on that, they're going to definitely not rank you as higher as other websites, if that makes sense.
Interesting. That does make sense. Yeah, so I think to understand kind of your response, which thank you so much. I think like when it comes to SEO, I kind of put it into like two big buckets. You have like off-page optimizations, and those could be like inbound links and even marketing or paid marketing or organic and that kind of stuff. And then you have like on-page optimizations. And so when it came to Angular and on-page optimizations, we were kind of like pushed to the back of the pack, right? Just in terms of the way that the DOM was rendered, just in terms of the performance, and time to interactivity. And it's funny that you mentioned the skeleton thing. At first, I was thinking of like the ghost skeleton elements, but I think you were actually referring back to like there was this idea many years ago of like just render and then don't hook up all, like don't actually run the JavaScript yet, but just render the DOM with your CSS and HTML, and then later come back and kind of wire up all the events and the closures and stuff. And I think that was something that maybe Mishka talked about a long time ago. And I know that fast forward to today, that's something that's kind of almost easily to obtain. And I'm interested to learn from you more in terms of what that looks like today. So we've kind of set the stage, right? So we've talked about like kind of historically speaking, Angular and SEO, not a great thing. Other frameworks were trying to solve this in other various different ways. But let's kind of fast forward to like nowish, right? So we've got Angular is a very mature framework. We've got things like server-side rendering. We've also got, and I want to give a shout out to Brandon Roberts with analog.js, where I can do static site generation. We've got hydration and partial hydration. We've got a lot of different things, a lot of different tools that we've got available to us. Tell us a little bit, like, what does Angular and SEO look like today as an Angular developer? Even if I'm not on the latest V20, let's say still on 19 or something. Kind of what is the landscape today? Am I still at the back of the pack, or what are some of the things that I can do to kind of move things forward?
No, I definitely not at the back of the pack. And in fact, I would say that especially in the past 3 years, through a series of from Angular 16, I think it was, when they started to launch some of like the initial hydration and incremental hydration, and up through now with V20 with route render mode, which is another big update that I can talk about in a minute. But basically a bunch of stuff to put them pretty on par with other frameworks that are out there. And really the key go-to model for the ultimate initial load performance and ultimate user experience, which translates to good SEO because the search engines see that and users see that and whatever, is instant rendered, that it's all a server view that's instantly rendered, and then like almost no JavaScript downloaded initially, like very, 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 very minimal. And then as the user interacts with the page, that it starts to come alive. So that's like part of the incremental hydration thing. And once you have that basic setup, which it took Angular a while to get there, React had that a little bit, before in the past. Once you get there, then from that point forward, all of the different advantages and the way that the framework can help is essentially in developer experience to try to make it easier to ensure that you can do that, for as you kind of continue to build and scale out your application. Because what happens a lot of time, frankly, is that if you're building something like a one pager, like simple test app, even back before all these features, you could hack, around the issues that Angular had to achieve these different things, but it would require a lot of effort, right? Like I've done it. I've hacked around the inabilities of Angular in the past to still achieve the same level of stuff, but it just required a lot of work. So the key is, once you kind of get there, is how easy can Angular make it? And it seems like every single release now, they just make it easier and easier with like little tiny updates.
What kind of updates are we talking about? Because we so far mostly focus on like the performance aspect, and now I feel like we're more switching into like the meta tech kind of things and other developer experience optimization. So what's on your mind?
Yeah, so like let's say with defer, it initially came out to have like deferred views, which has advantages. This isn't all just SEO and server-side rendered stuff. Like a lot of this stuff has advantages just for general performance and user experience, even if you aren't doing any of that, like just a client-side app. But like deferrable views, they've added like extra features to deferrable to make it to the point where now you can have kind of like essentially like server-only components in essence, even though they don't call them that, and only hydrate when the user starts navigating around. And then like another good example is I mentioned the route render mode. So like you can already do at the router level lazy loading, which helps on the client side so that you can kind of cut up your package into little pieces, which is a very good practice to do. And then you only load them once they go to that route. But the thing that was missing was to say that for one particular route, you just don't need client side at all. Like not even forget about even like deferred views or whatever else. Just it's like straight static. And there were ways to accomplish this in the past, but again, it was kind of like a pain or whatever. But now it's like a very simple API. Like it made like literally a bunch of like I deleted a whole bunch of code that I had in my
That's cool.
app that I did in order to like try to achieve this now. And it's like a very simple like one line for each route that now you can achieve the same thing.
So
That's cool.
I have not used that. So that basically just means it does like a static generation or like hydrates it once and does a static generation of that snapshot then basically and just push out that HTML for that route.
So it makes sure first of all that like for routing, you know, there is a little bit of trickiness that has to go on in order to enable this, because if you're on the client side and you're only doing client side routing, it's going to always look to the client side JavaScript to load the next page for route. But if you want to do this mix mode where you have like a server only pages and client only pages, it has to know for the server only pages that it has to kind of reload and go back to the server. You know what I mean? Because you want it to just have no client side JavaScript at all. And that is actually important for, I mean, certain number of use cases that like I've had in the past, that it's super beneficial. Even like the little tiny amount that is, you know, for doing some of the hydration stuff, you get rid of that, it makes it even more optimized. So I mean, these are all like little tiny, like 1%, like little things or whatever, but it adds up. It does make a difference when you are kind of like trying to like have like the most optimal site.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. Thank you for bringing that. Yeah, so it looks like I have not used this yet, and so it's something I want to play with. Yeah, right in your route configuration, you can put the render mode, and then you can have pre-render, server, or client. So you can instruct and I think a good example of this might be like an about page or something. It's like, listen, there's no interactivity here. It's just some images, and sure, it looks great, but there's no need that this needs to go through additional like bootstrapping or hydration. And so just render this as like static. And so that's fantastic. What are some other opportunities for developers with kind of the newer modern Angular tool set to target SEO?
Yeah, so I mean, so a lot of this is again performance related. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff like on what content you are actually producing, which we could have a separate podcast on that. That isn't necessarily Angular related. Although actually one thing on this I will say before I talk about some Angular specific stuff is that with a lot of the changes that have gone on recently, it is beneficial to not just have like a content only site. So even the traditional sites that have been only content only in the past have realized that Google and other like especially AI related UIs are favoring the sites that have like not only good content and a certain type of content with certain characteristics, but ones that have some unique feature, some unique capability. So that's why like Angular and React based apps are in some ways performing a lot better in this new world than just like the straight static websites of the past, which used to like dominate, SEO.
Are they looking at like interactivity or like like on page time, that kind of thing? Because if I've got a web app or something like that, maybe that's got a more advanced functionality and interactivity, and I'm going to spend more time on it. Is that what kind of the metrics that they're looking at? I'm just curious. Yeah.
So, I mean, the short answer is yes, but it's helpful to kind of understand the background there. And So let me quickly mention about like what this big change was that I sort of alluded to earlier, like the past couple of years, right? So it's like I mentioned, it's all AI related or whatever. And so when ChatGPT came out, right, which was like the first leader in this space in terms of like people's able to utilize LLM based technology, there's always been spammers. There's always been people who are trying to hack search
Oh yeah,
engines
game the system.
in order to game the system, in
That's
order to
right.
get users.
Even for
Always,
short-term
it's
gains. Yeah, yeah, right.
yes, been a
Yes.
constant battle. But
Yeah.
as soon as they were able to utilize these tools, and then quickly other companies followed, Gemini and everything else, spammers, it was like they were on steroids. They
Yeah.
started generating like
Instant
so
generation.
much content. Yes. And
Garbage.
to the point
Yes.
where
Yeah.
in August of 2023, like
Okay.
there was like a month where like you guys may or may not remember it, where like Google search results went really crazy. Like they were just show like the amount of spam that was being shown for like top results just like went off the charts because
Interesting.
through different techniques utilizing a lot of generated AI
Generate.
content,
Yeah.
they were able to get
Yeah.
around a lot of the safeguards that Google had. So
Yeah.
Google like hit the panic button, sort of drastically changed their algorithm,
Interesting.
and it started favoring a lot of things that it hadn't in the past. And a lot of it was for the intention of trying to not put a lot of this just AI generated low quality content higher up in the search ranking. And so like and one thing which is not Angular related or whatever, but just to give you an example, is like they relied on more like brand authority. Like so like they cared more about your reputation of your entire brand instead of like a single individual content. But the thing getting back to, okay, so circling back to the thing that I was starting to say, how it's related to this, is that one of the ways that they knew or things that they seem to favor more is like if your site was not just like a bunch of content, but it actually had something unique, some like special functionality that users were able to like sign up for and to use and like like pay for, like even whatever, anything like that gave them like extra signals that like, okay, this isn't just a spammer putting like up garbage on the web or whatever. So people noticed that like, okay, you have to have some sort of unique feature, like something that goes beyond content. So it's both of those. You still need the content, you still need good content, but having both of those is helpful now for SEO. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I do remember like vaguely that timeline because I think previous to like LLMs, content was really important. In fact, like I remember I went to like an SEO conference a long, long time ago, and I remember like one speaker was like, "Content is king." You know what I mean? Like on stage, like it's all about like you got to get that blog and get other people talking about your product, and of course off-page optimizations and inbound links. But you had to have like this really active content and constantly like signaling to Google, "There's something new here. Come back and check me again." Send the Google bot. I want to be, I want you to index my site again and see, oh, I have all this new content. So I continue to move up the rankings just in terms of like freshness, but also like other areas and like getting kind of that long tail. And I've got all this great content. And then I do remember like all the Gen AI stuff came out. And man, I even remember like my realtor, like the newsletters that I used to get from my realtor, which I don't think anyways, this is a random story, but like, there'd be like these, like they'd write things on their blog, you know what I mean? Of like what's happening in like the local community or broadly speaking. And then quickly, like pretty quickly, it was like you'd click the link or maybe you'd go look at it or something. Not every time. Sorry about that. But like occasionally I'd look at it and I would literally like come look at it. It's like, oh, this is obviously just generated. Close. I'm out of here. Like, I'm not going to read this. This is junk. It just like looked and smells like junk and bot generated. And I think a lot of like marketers in the beginning were like, Gen AI, this solves our content problem. Like I can just like crank out loads of content. And you're right, the spammers and the bots all kind of like pick that all up. And so it's interesting that Google like had to make a drastic shift in terms of like, okay, well, maybe content isn't king anymore because content now has become cheap. It's really easy to generate this content. And so now I'm going to look at like legitimacy and interactivity and like what actual value prop do you have in terms of
Yes,
like your
exactly.
your offering here. Because before they could kind of infer value prop maybe through some of these other signals, but now those have gone down. Um, yeah, so what does that mean for the Angular developer, I guess, is what I'm wondering, like kind of steer it back a little bit. Yeah, what does that mean for the Angular developer? So these
Well,
things
so
change, the interactivity is there.
I
We've
mean,
got a lot
among
more
other
tools.
things,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it encourages us to use something like Angular for like in the past. You'd be like, oh, your site requires like you're
SEO.
using
Go get
organic search as
WordPress.
a channel.
Yep,
Like, yeah,
yep.
don't use Angular. But like
Don't,
now, I think it's
yeah,
actually an asset. It's like
yeah.
valuable to you know what I mean?
That's cool. Yeah, that's really cool. And we've got all these tools with server-side rendering and static site generation and all of this that we can kind of play happily with the SEO space. So I've got a question. Maybe this is a change in topic. So I want to see if Chow or Jan want to chime in here before I kind of move the conversation forward in a different direction.
No, I'm just learning here. I'm aware of all of the new stuff related to server-side rendering inside of Angular, but I have not had a chance to actually use them or work with them.
Yeah, and I think part of that though is like to Jeff's point, right? Chow is like historically Angular wasn't the tool that you picked up, right? I think Gatsby or Next or maybe some of these other tools that
Yeah.
really like out of the box, quote unquote, like. And I know Gatsby wasn't a React, but anyways, kind of like out of the box, it's like, hey, I can really easily like render, like I can have like SSG and I can have server-side render, SSR, and I can like mix all these things together and I can make it really easily and everything just kind of worked together. Whereas like traditionally Angular, that was kind of a challenge to put that all into play. Go ahead, Jan. What do you got for us?
I'm first of all too stupid to unmute myself, but what I was wondering is if you're seeing like an advantage point in using Angular over one of those more traditional frameworks that are like intended for like SEO heavy application like Astro, Next, those kind of things. Gatsby, even though that's kind of a curse word these days.
Yes, sorry about that. Astro.
Yeah, I mean, so the
And Astro's
primary
great.
advantage I see, to be honest, is that Angular allows you to add the super rich functionality when you need it. So like those things are great, perfect for doing the content stuff and the stuff that's geared specifically for search engines. But when you have your entire application, it's going to be a mix of that. It's going to be a mix of landing pages that are geared for people coming in, and then some rich content and rich functionality, and being able to do all that in one framework. That's where the major advantage comes. Now, in the past, again, like tons of different sites that I've worked on in different setups, and I've worked in some where you kind of split things up and you use like different routing to have, let's say one of those more traditional SEO friendly frameworks handle
It's your
all the
marketing
landing
site.
pages, and then it's completely separate for this
app.acmeinc.com is your Angular app, and www is
Some-
your WordPress or your Squarespace or your Wix or whatever it is that you're using for like your content
now the
management.
key is it's not that it head to head for that stuff it's like better per se, but it's now that it brings it all together and you could just use one thing for everything and no context switching and whatever.
All right, so here's my approach. I guess like here's my perspective to should I use Angular server-side render for today's applications, not necessarily SEO. Right. The thing that I see in Angular server-side rendered right now is still lacking in other frameworks is the ability to use the server that comes with server-side render to actually set up your routing for your data. And that's like a huge bummer to me. Like, let's say that I want to
use analog.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm just saying like Angular CLI, like native out of the box experience. I want to make let's say I want to make content to promote Angular SSR. And in order to do that, in order to build like a full-blown full stack application by just using Angular, I would still have to stand up like a no express application for my backend separately. And I think that's great like friction for content creators to like push stuff out there to promote this. And it's like I think it's like a two ways kind of thing. People are
But-
looking for stuff, looking to try stuff, but not enough content.
But isn't that kind of the same in other frameworks too? I mean, all of them have an SSR story by now, but not necessarily a server story. I mean, that's where Nuxt comes in. That's where Next comes in. That's where Analog comes in. Like Vue and stuff, you can do server rendering too, but
Yes, but because those are mainstreamed and like in Angular.
okay, yeah, that's a fair point.
Yes,
That's a fair point.
the thing is like, so let's say if Angular on the server-side rendered page on the documentation, they say, we endorse analog.js. That's a different story.
Yeah, okay.
Because like these
Yeah,
frameworks,
yeah.
these different libraries saying React, hey, if you want server-side render, go use Next.js. Angular does not say that.
Yeah, and I think they should. I think that Analog covers like a really great space, and they do like an amazing job. So and maybe they will in the future. I don't know. I would say that originally in 2016, when Angular 2 came out initially, Patrick Stapleton and I created Angular Universal as a separate library, so it wasn't part of Angular at first, and it took years, like at least 4 years before they started like they integrated everything to like inside the Angular library
Angular
itself.
repo. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was actually
No, I guess-
technically we did add it. It was on the Angular repo, but it wasn't part of the main code base. It was like a separate module that wasn't part of the main mono repo or whatever.
Yeah.
So slightly different or whatever, but whatever. Like it made sense. I don't know if that'll necessarily happen with like something like Analog, just because like it's not like I think it would be probably too many features. So it's like in a way a good thing to keep it separate. But I would advocate for them endorsing it, like for like actively being like, this is the solution for that. You know, I would be advocating for it.
Yeah, it's a great framework. Yeah, for Hash Brown we built it all with Analog, and yeah, it was my first like big project with Analog, and I was impressed at just how well it worked. Like it's so for me anyways, and maybe just another shout out to Brandon and Chow and team. Like everything I wanted was already there, which signaled to me as an Angular developer that this is fairly mature, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Like I wanted to build an interactive experience. I wanted to have static pages. I want to have docs. I want to have an API reference. I want to be able to have, all of these different things. I want to be able to pull them together. I want server routing. I want all of this. And it was just like every time I went back to the documentation, I was like, oh, cool. Nice. That's there. I like that. Great. Like everything I wanted to pull off the shelf was there for me. And so, yeah, big shout out to Analog. I think if you're, potentially considering building something like what we're talking about, where like this is a hybrid marketing / e-commerce, like kind of public facing application, and SEO is important. Seems like at the base, Angular plays very well with it today. And then if you're looking to use something like an open source project like Analog, where you kind of have some additional tooling around Angular, it's a great option. It's a really great option. All right, let's nuke this conversation. Let's get to the next conversation. Jeff, does SEO matter today with AI?
So yeah, this is a big topic, because if you talk to some people, some SEO professionals, especially some people whose businesses have been hurt by a lot of the changes, they feel that everything is killing the web. To go like I'm saying to go to an extreme like viewpoint here, because if you have, and I don't necessarily subscribe to this, but let me lay it out or whatever.
Yeah, unpack it, please. Yeah.
So if you have AI giving you the answer, you make a good argument that is the best possible user experience, but then they get that answer from other websites, right? But they don't give any traffic to those websites. So that breaks the sort of fundamental economics of the web, like at least what it's been for a long time, that it used to be these websites would give stuff away for free in exchange for users coming back to them, that these other, whatever other systems that utilize their free content would give them back users, like give them links or whatever. Now, I mean, it's debatable whether, to what degree, like that's not been fully the case for a long time, because Google has always had certain things.
I was going to say, wasn't there was like a big lawsuit back in the day with Google because they were rendering some of the content from a website, like right on the top of Google. You know, they stitch in all the various
Instant
things.
answers, yeah.
There you go. That was it. Right, right.
Yeah,
And I don't
yeah,
remember,
yeah.
I don't think it was the New York Times, but that's with OpenAI. There was a lawsuit, you know, years ago where they were, you know, this company, this organization was negatively affected because their content
Yep.
was being like lifted up off of their site onto the
Yes.
actual SERP. And so in the SERP page, people were like, oh, there's my answer. I don't need to like go down, click on this organic result or
Yes.
perhaps even paid result, land on
Yep.
this page and then visit them, and then have an opportunity to learn more, to explore their website, maybe sign up for that product, you know, whatever that funnel looks like. But there was a big lawsuit back in the day because of that content being lifted up onto the SERP. And I know that, you know, that was an issue back then, but it's almost like this is coming back up again now with AI. So yeah, I think there's some legitimacy to the concern.
Yeah, and so I don't think the answer in the long run is necessarily like, oh, we got to add links back to everything. And in fact, so if you are someone who kind of like believes that these AI systems are gonna get better, which you should, you know, because they're going to continue to improve the way they do things, you have to assume that more often people are going to get their answers within the context of that user interface and not necessarily be bounced around all over the place. So I think the answer is not necessarily adding links back in, even though it's okay and it's a good thing to have the referral links at the bottom. But I just don't think that many people click on them, and less people click on them over time as they trust the AI more. So it more is okay. A couple things. One is the SEO people being a little bit more smart, or people that are using search and AI as a channel, like that you want users, you actively are trying to get users through search or search engines or AI user interfaces. It's having first of all, restructuring your content to that in a way that appeals to a lot of those AI interfaces, but there'll be all sorts of new tricks of like, you know, okay, whatever you're writing, including your brand in it, so that like when the AI is displaying the answer, that you make sure that it has your brand somewhere in there, that like there's something along those lines that can be done. There is with MCP, which is like a way of having these AI use functionality within websites. There's a lot of flows that people have started to like figure out or think about, I should say, because it's so new, like that it's not really being used at scale or anything like that. But there's flows that like a lot of discussion within the SEO channels or whatever else of like how you basically leverage an MCP service that is utilized through AI and sort of transition that to somehow get the user to either recognize your brand and or like get them to then, you know, come to your site afterwards. So there's different paths along those lines that are possible. Like again, that's like super new, and like who knows how that's going to develop. And then the last way that a lot of people are really pushing on is trying to push for systems that or process not processes, but some type of setup where these AI companies are incentivized to actually straight up pay content creators and other creators because they provide such valuable stuff. And that doesn't really exist right now. But there's a lot of discussion and different ways that could potentially happen in the future as well.
Yeah, I could see that evolving, just like we saw like YouTube or whatever evolve from like just a free website with, you know, basically, I think Google was losing whatever $500 million a year on YouTube to clearly things have shifted over the last 5-10 years in terms of what that looks like and how the content creators have been really instrumental to the growth and really included in part of that. And that's, I'm sure there's a lot of debate and nuance within that. I'm not in that community, so I don't fully understand it, but I think that's really interesting. So the short answer, I think that you said is like SEO still matters today, if I understand correctly, but things are certainly shifting and changing, and it'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on the market as things change. MCP, kind of how these AI providers are going to be shifting. But content still matters, and good content still matters, if I understand correctly, because these AI companies are
Definitely.
still, to a certain extent, built on the content of humanity. And so, yeah, I think that's really interesting. I have a ton of questions, but I also don't want to just dominate the heck out of this conversation. I want to give Chow and Jan an opportunity to kind of chime in here as well. I'm sure they've got some thoughts.
So one thing I'm wondering then is like, how do you, for instance, evaluate now GitHub's move to have like an MCP on the one hand, but also GitHub being like, particularly for developers, like very content heavy. Like at least I use it a lot for like, I don't know, I look very often like Angular TCB engine and takes me to the right file in GitHub directly, because that's a thing that I need to look at every so often. So how do you evaluate such a move versus like, because it definitely takes away from the actual site over to like whatever chat interface you use or what tool you use to interact with an MCP.
So it's hard. I've actually talked or tried to ask a bunch of Googlers about something along these lines at Google I/O. In like, how should we be thinking about this? People that have traditionally relied on this channel and or want to in the future, and especially when the value coming back is not necessarily there right now, which is sort of what you're alluding to.
Yeah.
And the common message, and I do think this is true, even though it's sort of annoying to like hear about, is that like ultimately, if you make something valuable, like you will eventually be rewarded for it, because like if you think of the incentives on their side, so like let's say you create this, because this is so new, like this MC, because we talked about that, like this MCP service that is really valuable. It people are using it a lot, but like you're losing money like crazy or whatever. So like there's a question of how long you could support that. But if the AIs start using it more and more, like eventually they're going to realize, and then like if you think about it in a larger scale of things, that this happens, but then a lot of these services just start going away because it's not being funded. Eventually, the market will dictate, like there'll be a realization that there has to be some sort of it's beneficial for these AIs to have that capability as well, and so that they have to somehow kick back. So I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't know the answer, but it's more, so it is more of a faith thing, I guess, which I feel very uncomfortable with. But the if you look at the history, I would say, like, okay, forget about the current environment. Let's bring it back to the 20 years of spammers trying to hack and get around like search engines. It's worked to some degree, like, but the thing that's consistent is whatever thing people figured out to make it work, it's always temporary, always temporary.
Always
Like eventually it
temporary.
goes
It's a cat.
away.
Yeah. It's a
Cat and mouse
mouse and
game, yes.
mouse. Yeah, or whatever. Yeah.
But if you do create just valuable content and is like something that's truly used by other people, that
Valuable.
is almost always consistent. Like because Google is incentivized to try to make sure that you're like whatever changes that they make, like okay, temporarily it might like there, even with my various websites, we've had dips and whatever else, even though it's been like really good content or really good, well, very popular app. But it bounces back quickly or whatever eventually, because again, it helps them as well. So
yeah.
Maybe not
it's
the best
interesting.
answer to give you.
I know, but I think that has long been the answer, right? And I mean, that's like if you build something of value and you continue to kind of play the long game on it, like hopefully the market responds appropriately, and those signals will come around. But you're right. I think there's a lot of like jostling in the short term. Go ahead, Jan.
But if I play devil's advocate, then what does SEO even matter if content is king? at the end of the day,
Yeah,
or quality.
Well,
Then-
okay. Okay. Yes. So
Here we
this
go.
has also
Let's
been a
see.
question that's been asked even, like a decade ago or whatever else. And so I guess the thing is, in order to like, it's one thing if you want to gain some sort of value back, and you will eventually, but if you want to be competing for like the top rankings and like the top of the tier for different areas, you always need both. Like you need to have like a super valuable service that is good, but then you also need to have that SEO part in order to like ensure that all of the right signals are communicated from
That's
like
right.
it's because you could have the best service and like because of
Nobody's
some
talking about
stupid
it.
tech or yeah
Or-
some technical glitch that you have that Google isn't able to like detect that, because they're not able to like see into the minds of every person on the planet or
Mhm.
whatever. So it is a combination of both that's needed for sure.
Okay, last question from my end, because the thing that I always feel with like SEO, it kind of feels like playing the system in a way, right?
Sure.
Because if you look at it like, okay,
To some
I'm
extent,
trying
it
to like,
is, right?
well,
Yeah.
but then that's again like saying like, okay, content doesn't matter as much. So it's like,
Yeah, but
how do you? Maybe I just would be interested in your perspective on that. Do you see?
Yeah, so
because on the
to
one
some
hand, I can
degree,
look. Sorry,
I agree with
just
you.
to-
I agree with you.
Okay, easy. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's so whenever you have like SEO is a marketing channel. It is a way of acquiring users at the end of the day. And there are other marketing channels. Any marketing channel you have. So like traditional sales or trying to do virality, which is a stupid channel or whatever. But any of the different marketing channels, you have to put effort into it. Like you have to like it's yes, your product is good, but then you have to put effort into the channel itself. And that's what I view SEO as is like that's it. So for some of the other ones, it's a different type of effort. For SEO, it means understanding those different weird rules and ever changing rules. Like it changes over time and trying to like keep up with it as it changes over time.
So in terms of like analogies, you kind of see it as like making the stupid face for a YouTube video where it's like, okay, it makes the content more discoverable, more approachable maybe.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the day, the content still matters more because otherwise people will look at it,
Yes.
identify it as garbage and leave within 10 seconds.
I agree. Yeah. In
Okay.
fact, it's funny. One of the things, so I'm part of this SEO Slack that people always tell their different stories of different clients and whatever. And the most common thing like that they always talk about is like whenever they go into a new client is like, oh yeah, okay, so we identify all this different stuff and like we can work on these different technical things, but okay, this will help, but like your core thing, like none of this is going to matter if like you don't improve this the core favorability, the actual feedback that you get from real users, human users, for your main thing. Like you can't put lipstick on a pig. Is that the analogy?
I think that's it, dog. I think that's it. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like some of the largest growth companies we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, their marketing strategy has been largely build something that people want and they'll just tell other people about it. Right. I mean, I don't want to get political. I hate to even say it, but like Tesla is like an example. I know, I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about Elon, but like, to a certain extent, like they've been broadly successful, certainly in the last, it's arguably around taxes and and the financing side of it. But to a certain extent, they've been successful just because they had no marketing strategy other than just build a really great product, and people will tell other people about great products, right? OpenAI is another example of like, I mean, talk about a hockey stick just in terms of like month over month or ARR, right? I mean, just massive, right? But yeah, go ahead. John's going to challenge me here. Yeah.
OpenAI is a little difficult because they have like all the Microsoft marketing budget in the background. But Cursor is a great example.
Yeah.
Cursor is actually a great example.
That's a really
They don't
good
even
point.
have
Yeah,
a marketing department.
Yeah, but their marketing is like developers telling other developers like, hey,
Yeah.
dude, you got to check this thing out. Watch this agentic mode and watch what happens when I use Claude 4. And wow, I can do this thing. And this is really powerful. And look at me go. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think Jeff's like one of our key takeaways here is like whether we live in the world of SEO, which was maybe kind of still alive and well today, or in the world of AI and how these two kind of bridge and kind of depending on what happens with the search engine result page and people's user behaviors and all of this. At the end of the day, you're building a great product, like hopefully the market responds to that great product, whether it's through whatever channel that's through. I think the other takeaway for me is also that like Angular is a great choice for building a marketing website and for building an app that where SEO and AI matter, right? So if you're building whatever it is, we're building Hash Brown open source project. We built it with Angular. Whereas, like honestly, I gotta say, like if this was like 3 or 4 years ago, I don't think I'd be building it with Angular. I think it would be like an Astro site or a Next.js or something like that. You know what I mean? And so that's just it's cool that it's as folks that have kind of followed the Angular story for a long time and are invested in the community, it's cool to see that Angular is kind of growing in this space. But yeah, a lot to learn in terms of how this all impacts kind of where AI goes and stuff. I think I was sharing I'll just share this real quickly before the podcast, before we started recording. We're a tiny little consultancy. We do a lot of stuff with banks and financial firms and that kind of thing. And a lot of folks use AG-Grid. And we had like our first client lead, like somebody emailed me and was interested in doing a project. And I was like, oh, cool. How did you hear about us? And they're like, I asked Jibbity, and Jibbity was like, talk to the folks at Live Love App. Like they're the people to talk to about Angular and AG-Grid. And so I was like, all right, dude, nice, very cool. I like this. So, it's like, what do I need to do to maybe further this along and like kind of what's kind of the long-term play here? Because I do anticipate, it'll depend. It'll be, I think, kind of variations based on any kind of generational and what kind of product you're building and all of that kind of thing. But I do anticipate that more and more folks are going to go straight to something like Jibbity and say, hey, I'm looking for a plumber, I'm doing a project, or I'm looking for a landscaper in my backyard, I'm in Kansas City, here's my budget, I kind of want a rock feature with a waterfall, who are some companies that I should reach out to? And they're going to be like, here's the landscaping down the road that, near you that, recently did a rockfall feature in somebody's backyard, you should call them. And you're like, great, I'll call them, or whatever that is. But go ahead, yeah, so maybe you're doing some landscaping.
That's hilarious because we're actually lining up contractors for backyard redesign right now. So,
oh, are you really? That's so funny. Yeah, I just pulled that out of my. Yeah.
On that note, though, you kind of alluded on that the browser will eventually die from your perspective, not the web. I still think that, or the way you sounded, like there will still be like web content used for like indexing and training LLMs. But what is your perspective? Do you think people? That's, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of like a picture that you hinted.
Me?
Yes, you.
No, I think
I want Jeff to answer this because I'm intrigued as well.
You pictured it, but I want Jeff.
Yeah, but I don't know. As like a kid of the '90s, like man,
you didn't have had a browser at that time.
I had IE 3.0. We had Netscape Navigator, dog. It was on the shelf at Staples. I could buy my browser and take it home with me and install it. I don't know, like browsers are just like right here inside me. Like I hope we never lose the browser.
It's like a Walkman next to it.
Yeah, and I hope we never lose like the openness of the browser, right? Like view source has been like or whatever it is, like the openness of the web. But yeah, go ahead.
But you're talking about the openness of the web, and I don't think that will go away. But
the
browser for me is really just a gateway. Yeah. It's basically like usability to like discover that. So, and I think that will eventually go away because it will be just more convenient to, as like in your example, like why should I go to Google and figure out what are the best landscapers in my area when I can also just go to ChatGPT to figure that out. So I would be really curious to hear your perspective on that.
And I think maybe I'll just pile on before Jeff. I'll give more time to Jeff to answer this question so he can come up with a really good one for us. Let me tee it up a little bit more for you, Jeff. Like, I think it's really interesting because you're onto something like, let's just back out of the conversation just real briefly. Like, think about like the workflows of the web today. Like, here's a really popular workflow in the web today. Like, I need to set up, I just started a new client or a new project. I need to set up a daily stand-up and I need to set up in my calendar. I want this to be a repeating event on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 o'clock. I want it to be on Thursday for our schedules. We're going to do a 10 a.m. stand up on Thursdays, and whatever it is. And so I go into Google Calendar and I hit add event, and I have to do this custom thing, and I have to go down here and I have to click this button and this button. Ah, shoot, I got this wrong. The validation is wrong. I got to come back, fix this thing. And it takes me like minutes to just create this like stand-up event, right? But the power of natural language with an AI model is I can say, hey, I need to create a stand-up Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 o'clock, Thursdays at 10 o'clock. Send the invite to my coworkers, Ben and Mike. Like natural language is really powerful, right? And so it'll be interesting to see like what that does with the browser, what that does with all of this. But that's just my ramblings. Jeff, you've had plenty of time to come up with an amazing answer. The question presented to you, Jeff, is are browsers dead? I think is the question. We're going to put a tombstone up on the slide, and we're going to put browsers on it and say that the browsers are dead. Yeah, we're all going.
The short answer is no. There'll always be use cases and whatever. But the real question is more so like, how many actual humans are going to be on
the web,
on your website, on your domain, viewing your website?
Interesting.
Versus consuming your services in other ways. And I do think that over time, people could consume your services potentially in other ways, either, giving your service like through like a MCP type thing where it's just like the functionality, and or maybe even in the future, like there's UI elements that you're able to somehow influence in some of these AI interfaces.
I think so
as well. Web components live again or whatever. I don't know, but
gonna happen.
AI components.
One interesting tipping point with a lot of that I'm not sure how it's going to go is, will these AI interfaces have ads at some point? And that may seem like a small thing, and it may seem maybe people have opinions one way or another, but that actually will have a pretty dramatic impact on a lot of different stuff. Because so it's one thing if everything is subscription based, and you can the user can trust that, like, okay, they paid their money and everything in here is not, there's no like ads snuck in or whatever. And in that case, they'll know if they see a certain piece of functionality that, like, okay, this came from this other site, like there wasn't like money exchange, I don't know, whatever. But like as soon as you introduce ads to it, it might make things weird. Like it might both for the user and for you as a service that's trying to be utilized within this, like I don't know how they'll work out, but that's going to have a dramatic impact on how this all plays out as well.
I think it's a really interesting point, Jeff. I mean, I read yesterday, OpenAI lost like 5 billion maybe last year or something like that, and like that's a bit of a burn. I'm sure they're not concerned about it, but I think they still have plenty of cash. But nonetheless, like it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. And ads is going to be one of those things, right? Is, now can I place ads, and what does that look like, and how does that change the whole dynamic and the relationship between me and Jippity? Because right now Jippity's like my friend, like we hang out, we talk, we chill, like I'd invite Jippity over to my backyard barbecue with my nice rock feature and water landscaping, but I don't know, like she starts selling me ads.
If they put ads in an unobtrusive way, sort of like Google circa 2002, like the early 2000s, where it's like in this sort of isolated area where like everybody knows, like, oh, that's the ad area, then actually I don't think that's necessarily an issue per se. I mean, especially for a free service or whatever. The problem really comes if they start integrating ads, in a way that
in the generative content,
where you're not sure,
or
I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like kind of like the sports event where it's like this halftime report is sponsored by Pepsi or something. And it's like this message
like that, dude,
was generated in cooperation with Microsoft.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it certainly changes the relationship, and it certainly impacts a lot of how people are going to be interfacing with these things. What do you got, Chow?
I just want to give my 2 cents on the like moving away from the web from a perspective of a individual contributor to a DevTools company. I did think that building a terminal UI applications right now is much better than the web.
Wait, say
Fair
that
point
again.
there.
Sorry. Wait, you cut out for me. Say it again.
I'm saying building a terminal UI applications right now at this
Yeah.
point with the current technologies is much better than a web-based application for a DevTools company.
Yeah, interesting.
For
Interesting.
example, I'm just saying, let's just take GitHub Actions for example. I personally would use a GitHub Actions terminal UI application than going to their web UI.
But yeah,
Because on the terminal, I already have my GitHub CLI all authenticated and everything, right?
yeah,
I can pull up an action that failed. I can pull the log from that fail, spin up another clause section with MCP servers
yeah.
loaded, whatever, right? It's just right there on my terminal. I don't have to leave the terminal at
Yeah.
all to go to Google and then search for the bugs and look at the logs and all that stuff.
I think.
Well,
I think. Oh, go ahead, Jan.
And terminal UIs are like have a very defined way of navigation and stuff. In a way, they are
Yes.
more accessible than web applications that often don't care about accessibility.
Yeah.
Like you know exactly
Yeah.
in a terminal application what a tab and an enter will do and how they interact differently.
Exactly. And what I
Yeah.
mean, like in terms of the availability of the MCP's technologies right now on the terminal is like much more vibrant than what is available
Yeah.
on the web. I don't think it's available.
Mhm.
That's like
It's interesting. Yeah, I think like two thoughts to that. I think, Chow, and maybe a little bit of a challenge included in this is like you could view in one perspective is you could view ChatGPT as that terminal, right? Of like, yeah, I don't need to go look at the issues or the pull requests or whatever it is on GitHub or consume it through the GitHub like web interface. I could consume that all directly through like a terminal ChatGPT and like a natural language element and say, hey, how many open issues are there? What issues do I need to review? What are like what's happening or whatever that is or whatever that interactivity looks like. And then arguably, I do think that we will see, maybe this is just my own personal perspective, but I do think that we will see web applications become more fluid in natural language and the ability to act more like a terminal. So you'll eventually maybe potentially go to websites and it's going to be more of a terminal-like experience on a website where you'll interact with the website. Because if you think about it, like today, like we spend a lot of time as web developers and engineers and designers determining the proper flow and navigation for a user in my web app. You know, even GitHub is a great example. You know, I'm going to put these links at the top and I'm going to show the files here, and over here is these little graph and the contributors. And I've determined and I've put tons of money and thought and user studies and design work into designing an optimal navigational experience for the user. However, with the natural language and with the LLM approach, what if I don't have to design that optimal navigational experience for the user? Rather, I let them tell me what they want and what they want to be presented with and how they want to navigate through this. And then I'll generate that UI based on what they're looking for, what they need, what answers they want. And so my UI is completely fluid based on who is it like the authenticated user or whatever it is. And like, yeah, maybe I still have some investment in optimal navigation. I'm going to put a hamburger menu up here. I'm going to have a left column here, right? But that might actually just go away more in the future as we begin to interact with web applications in a more natural language LLM optimized world. But that's just my thinking and how I think about things. So I don't know if that helps, but I'm just, I think this is a really fun conversation. I appreciate, I think the terminal UI thing is really cool. And I like the Jan last point. I know Jan wants to get in here. Last point is like the known navigational aspect is really important, right? As a user, like I know, like, but again, that's almost dictated by the terminal UI rather than dictated by myself. It's still a predetermined navigational flow, which is great. But maybe there's another optionality around it. But yeah. I'll shut up now.
I love what you
Sorry.
said, but I want to completely go back to our original topic because
Yes.
even though I already said that 5 times that I just have one more question, I do have one more question for Jeff.
You do.
I do. How important do you think like LLM text formats are? Because there's this emerging web standard of like having a /LLM path in your web app.
LLM.txt. Yeah.
Yes, that basically summarize
Yeah.
like all the fancy
Context.
content. And
Yeah.
I personally could
Yeah.
not find assertive statement that says OpenAI uses that, or Cursor uses that,
Right.
or someone
Yeah.
actually uses that.
It reminds me of robots.txt, right?
Well, but then we have the data that
Yeah.
someone uses it.
But somebody started
Yeah.
that. Didn't somebody like? Isn't the history of that, Jeff? Like, isn't the history that like somebody started this and then it kind of like took off, and then now it's like, well, not now, but 15 years ago, if you didn't have a robots.txt, you got like a red check on your SEO audit or whatever. Like, how could you not do this? But yeah,
Well,
go
eventually,
ahead, Jeff.
once people start doing something in mass, like it's funny. There's certain things you try to get people to do, and you try put so much effort into it, and they just will not do it or whatever. And then other things take off out of nowhere, and you're like, where did this come from? And usually, when it's the latter, like some random thing, has taken off, and people are doing it, it's both very difficult to stop them, and
Yes.
people like most people realize, like, well, it's probably not in our best interest. Like, let's just use this as best we can, because it's so hard to get to, if you tried to stop them and get them to do something else, that would probably fail. You know what I mean? Like for robots TXT, it's like, oh, we want to do this other format. It's like, well, nobody's going to do that, or whatever the way you want to do it.
Isn't that funny?
Use the thing that's already there, that's working.
Yeah.
But as far as the
generic.
LLM text, to be honest, I have not tried to use that. I don't know much about that. I'll have to look into it, because, but I suspect that I can't imagine that, unless out of nowhere, like robots, like it sort of takes off on its own. I wouldn't think it would, just because it's sort of unnecessary.
They're already crawling. The bots are already
they're already
crawling the whole content.
Yeah, and they're already good at like discerning what your stuff is about, and also
the LLM text. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The LLM text though is more for like my context stuffing, right? And so like if you go to like the AI engineer conference that was down in San Francisco last week, if you go to AI.engineer, you click on the top in their header, they've got like a link to their LLM.txt. And so I can snag that, and it's just a system prompt, we'll call it that, right? It's not, you're not actually putting it in the system prompt, but it's a system prompt that I can basically copy paste all that LLM TXT, and it has all the schedule and the speakers and the agenda and what's for lunch and everything in it. So I'd grab this huge body of text, and LLM context window now is massive. So I grab these, whatever, 10,000 tokens worth of content.
Okay.
Sure. I go, hey, Jippity, I am attending AI Engineer Conference next week in San Francisco. I am staying at the Hyatt downtown. Here's the LLM.txt. What are some fun things that I can do on Tuesday night before the conference starts on Wednesday morning? And it'll take all that and be like, great, Brian, the Hyatt looks like a great choice, because that's what it always says. And, you're going to really enjoy this pre-party that's going to be down the street. It's going to be a bunch of Angular developers getting together talking about AI. It's right up your alley. And I parsed it from this giant context. And so here's this nice answer for you.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know of any like automated around that, right, Jan? Where like
that's what I'm wondering, because
in that context or anything. Like I have to do that, don't I?
That's what I thought it was intended for, at least. For like,
that's my understanding.
Basically, to define what the LLM can train on from like a website perspective. I have the website open, and we can put it in the show note. But LLM text is a proposal to standardize on to provide information to help LLMs use website at inference time. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And I thought, I couldn't find it now on top of my head, but I thought even Angular.dev now uses it.
What?
Ooh, does it? I didn't even know that. Let me check it out.
I thought so.
Oh, Angular does?
LLM.txt. Let's see.
I couldn't find it.
Not found.
But I thought I saw something the other day.
Yeah, but could you imagine, like, for like on the Angular.dev instance, like they could stuff all the docs, but they could also just stuff like the whole API ref, right, into like a giant TXT file. Generate it statically or dynamically or whatever, and or build.
So,
and then now I can use that to stuff my context and ask questions about the new
basically
viewchild
the context
function
window. But
yeah, it would. But then maybe my editor is not going to keep constantly using like @viewchild, and it'll actually use the viewchild function instead because it can see
Correct,
that
and
that's
it
valuable.
could be properly version for like, oh, you're using Angular 17. Here's all the API for Angular 17.
Here's the
So
llm.txt for 17, stuff that into your context, and now you can ask questions against your editor, the Chippity or whatever, and say, only use Angular 17 signal or whatever, 18 signals or whatever it is. And so it'll do that, and it knows the yeah. Go ahead, Jeff. You want to sneak in
So
here?
on the SEO Slack, which is like all of the big name SEO people chatting,
Including
about
you.
this. I'm just a lurker.
Yeah.
So I didn't look at this before, but they seem to be going back and forth saying it's a gimmick/fad. No system is going to want to expand additional unreliable request. Same reason why there's no site-wide schema standard yet. It's just a proposal yet. It's not a standard. So like, I think the general thing they're saying is nobody's really jumping on that as far as the SEO professionals until if and when it becomes a standard among
There's official signals.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting they said schema, because like I think like schema.org and some of the stuff that the data JSON or whatever it is, JSON D, and putting all the attributes on your website to really clarify to the Google bot that this event happens at this time and all that kind of stuff. Go ahead, Jan.
So the LLM text site has a directory with all the sites that uses them. There are a couple of big players on there with Bun, Cloudflare that do use it. Svelte.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye on it. We'll see.
It's an interesting thing, like whether it'll become part of the tooling, though. And I don't know if it would go into the training data necessarily, and maybe that's the case. Maybe that was more of your question here, Jan. But also, like, say I'm using just like the Jibbity client, and I ask an Angular question. What if I could say, hey, you're just in natural language. Hey, use the following llm.txt file for version 19. I'm using Angular 19. I want you to write only code with modern signal-based approaches. Use this as a reference, and now I can ask you that question, and I've got that context. Yeah,
I made the proposal, at least for JetBrains AI, when we have a /web tool, we call it, that it also checks the /LLM text or whatever the proposal is for
just
like information.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see, because will the tools, like, I don't know if it'll go into training data. Maybe that's to Jeff's point, just in terms of like the SEO and the trust factor. I can stuff anything I want into that, or I guess I can stuff anything I want into my website. But it'll be interesting to see whether that picks up as a standard, or where in the tooling that gets pulled in, kind of more of it runtime, or is that more of like a training like data set that goes into it. I mean, OpenAI can't get their hands on enough data. I can't imagine why they wouldn't include it at some point, or something like that. But fascinating stuff. I feel like we could just keep going, but I think the listener is probably like, man, when are these guys going to wrap up? Jeff, man, it's been such a privilege to just chat with you and to learn from you and all of this stuff. I think I already kind of outlined some of the key takeaways, but I think the other key takeaway is that, for me anyways, is that Angular continues to push the boundary forward. Angular will be a framework of the future no matter what. And I think Angular will continue to play well in that space, whether that's a mixture, hybrid, SEO, AI world, or whatever that looks like. I think, Angular has been a long committed standard around just like moving the web forward. And so it'll be very interesting to see how Angular kind of continues to progress in this way. But a huge kudos to the Angular team, and of course to the analog team, and some of the stuff that is in the Angular space today, and the broader ecosystem around just building really great interactive user experiences using a framework that we all like and enjoy to use. And we don't get penalized for that, which is really nice, because it did feel like, years ago, you almost got penalized to a certain extent for using Angular for a marketing website. And so most of the time, like, my experience was, and especially with like being in the consulting space, is that, Angular never really powered the marketing website, right? The marketing website was WordPress or whatever. And that's a great choice. There's nothing wrong with WordPress. It's very powerful. But now Angular is, in terms of building your entire ecosystem on a singular framework, that's a possibility today. I can build my marketing website and I don't have to like reship assets and have additional domains and routing and everything set up to kind of fork off like the marketing side from the app highly interactive side. And there's a lot of great technologies and tools available to Angular developers to do that. So man, thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking some of the
No,
hard
thank you
hitting
guys for inviting me.
questions. Yeah,
Great time.
Jeff, if people want to follow you online, or they want to get to know you, and definitely please do plug your company and the things that you guys are doing. We'd love to hear more about that.
Well, yeah, definitely. If you have customer service problems, you can visit gethuman.com. That we have tools so that you don't have to wait on hold, and you could have our AI agent try to solve your problem on your behalf. Call the company and try to speak on your behalf to solve the problem or whatever if you want. And then the other big thing I'm doing right now is I have my own channel, YouTube channel, Tech Time Today. In fact, Friday, I am recording a new episode with Stephen Fluen, if you guys remember him. That we're going to be talking. I'm sure we're going to be talking about a lot of other AI stuff, a lot of AI stuff, a lot of Angular stuff, a lot of SEO stuff. So, and I do short form content. I try to edit it down to like 10-minute pieces each. So definitely check that out.
Cool.
Very cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Jeff. And to the listener, we'll see you next time. Bye.
See ya.